when you talk about bumping a player, it's pretty much
great courage. One that says the bump is dead, that's how you deliver it.
What is going on, YouTube universe? My name is Trent. Some of you guys might know me as Zirra from other corners of the YouTube universe, and welcome to the Hip and Shoulder, where we discuss everything AFL related. And today we're diving into episode 4 of my AFL video podcast series, The Round Recap. If you're unfamiliar with this format or this podcast series, what the Round Recap is a reflection of the round that previously went down the week prior. And this week we're reflecting on round 3. Easter football, Thursday through to Monday. We had some banger games, we had some surprise upsets, and we had some terrible fucking umpiring display yet again. It fails to really, sink into my head at times that the umpiring fraternity can get worse than what we have seen the week prior. And then the next week comes around and they're infinitely worse over, that 7-day period. It's starting to get out of hand, and the AFL need to do something here, whether it's them take ownership of the fact that the umpiring have just, the umpiring fraternity have lost control of the game. They're paying things that they shouldn't be paying. They're not paying things that they should be. They are incredibly inconsistent with their calls, and to be quite honest, it ruined some games of football over the weekend. We kicked things off on Easter Thursday. Is Easter Thursday a thing? I'm not even sure if Easter Thursday is a thing, but it started on Thursday night with Brisbane hosting Collingwood at the Gabba in the 2023 AFL Grand Final rematch, where we know, obviously, Collingwood got up and won that premiership. And we've known Brisbane to be so synonymous with having big, decent wins at home, and travelling to the Gabba is one of the tallest orders in AFL football today. The Brisbane Lions have just managed to turn that place into a fortress of solitude. It really is a place that they have made their own, and teams from all over the country find it so hard to come and pick up a win there. And Collingwood got their first win of the season. Not just, they did it quite convincingly, and this was on the back of Collingwood going through a scoreless second quarter, which is the first time since Craig McRae has taken over at Collingwood as head coach that they have gone through a quarter without scoring at all. Not a behind, not a goal. They came out of the gates strong in the first quarter and really put a gap on Brisbane early. And then, as I mentioned, that period in the second quarter, they didn't score at all. And Brisbane, I think, went into half-time with a 5-point lead. And then they were chasing tail for the rest of the game. It was a different Collingwood that come out in that second half. It was the Collingwood that we knew and have come to appreciate that won that premiership. The defensive pressure was back up again. Players were hitting targets. They were linking up with that handball chain. They got back to their best in that second half, and it was brilliant to watch. It just still surprises me that for that little lapse in that second quarter where they didn't score at all, that not only did they fail to, do anything forward of the ball, but defensively they broke down as well. And it is something we have come to see in the first 3 rounds prior to that, round 0, then round 1 and round 2, that the defensive structures and systems of Collingwood failed them and let them down severely. But in this second half of football, they claimed that back. And I don't know whether Collingwood are back in a sense. You obviously need to have a couple more games to scope that out. But when they're at their best like they were then, they still play the best brand of football going around. Some might argue that Sydney and GWS are showing a better brand this year and a more sustainable brand, and I would probably tend to agree, but it's still hard to argue that at the peak of their powers, Collingwood is still one of the best teams in the comp, and the way that they play is just so brilliant to watch when they're at that peak. Not the football that we've seen them play the first, opening 3 rounds. Brisbane are now 0-3. Collingwood go 1-3. And I made the mistake of saying going into that round that the loser would be 0-4, because I completely forgot about the fact that Brisbane have had their bye already. So I do apologise for making that mistake. But anyway, questions have been posed to myself all week about whether or not the loser of this game would have their season derailed. And I don't think the season derails. I just feel it's a harder climb to get into a top 4 spot from this point. And some people will argue that, and I know some people, I know exactly who would argue that, but I just feel with the competition this year and some of the quality football we've seen from other teams that, you know, have already got a 2-3 game jump on other teams in the competition, it's going to be hard to kind of scrap your way up the ladder if you don't find consistency early. And Collingwood, you know, thankfully, luckily, they found that consistency again in that second half, and they played a really good brand. Brisbane, on the other hand, still just perplex me so much, because on paper, they have one of the best teams in the comp. They have a team that I feel should have already delivered a premiership or two by now, especially with this mix that they currently have. But it's just the case, at least for me, that only a certain amount of people are carrying the load at Brisbane, and there are some that are underperforming quite severely. I hate to throw names, you know, under the bus and out of a hat, but Eric Hipwood, for starters, what the fuck are they paying him big bucks for if he's going to go missing every week? Danaher hasn't come close to delivering what he should have been able to deliver at Brisbane since being traded from Essendon. Cameron, live wire small forward, but sometimes lacks that consistency in his game as well. But then you're on the flip side, you've got the likes of McCluggage, Zorko, Neil, Dunkley. They just try their guts out every fucking week, and it's so disappointing to see a team where you've got a midfield core that is so dominant and is so packed with star power just fall short, especially like they've started this year. That brings a point of discussion to the table, and one that a few of you guys at home have wanted me to discuss, and that is this whole Brisbane-Las Vegas saga that has popped up. Namely, some of the comments that have popped up. One came from my best mate, who turned around and said, is there much substance of the rumour mill regarding Brisbane's Vegas trip? And is this what's negatively impacting their play, or is there nothing in it? And other people just jumped on board on that and said, yep, we want to know your opinions on this, your thoughts on this. And before I dive on in, I just want to say that if I ever dive into discussion points like this, it is all based on my opinion, but I try to formulate those opinions based upon facts that we have already been delivered, and I don't kind of want to stray from things too much that hasn't been divulged to us from the media yet. But if you are watching this video and you are unfamiliar of this Bris Vegas kind of scenario that's going down, essentially what happened was there was a group of 10 blokes who went over to Las Vegas in the off season for a boys trip, and majority of that 10 were players from the Brisbane Football Club, and they had a WhatsApp like group chat that they were kind of texting each other on while they were over there, and unfortunately that apparently connected to the iCloud, and the partner of one of the players was able to access that group chat off another device back at home here in Australia, and then she shared that group chat with all the other partners of the players that were over there. And apparently some of the shit that was going down, and I'd probably use the word debauchery because I think that would probably cover maybe some of the stuff that is going down, because it hasn't been reported what has gone down, but you could assume, boys being boys, it would involve sex, drugs, and rock and roll. So essentially what has been said is those messages were shared around to partners, and some of those partnerships have been ended, destroyed by what went down, and some people are suggesting there could be a disconnect between some of the players that went over there because there was further dramas. Obviously, Brisbane have disputed all of this, and there's now a boycott, apparently, that Brisbane are going to boycott the Herald Sun, and they're going to boycott, you know, some radio stations, 3AW, I think, and stuff like that. And my opinion on this is that you have to look past just disconnect between players, because obviously when players lose that chemistry with one another, it's going to be hard to connect come game day. But if there's issues going on behind closed doors at home in their personal lives as well, and potentially, you know, having these relationships ruined or on the edge, you would think that that would be enough to kind of shake the cage a little bit, especially with mental health being such a big thing in this day and age. And if you've got shit going on in your personal life that becomes too hard for you to kind of bear and carry, everyday people carry that into work every day. You know, if someone has a fight with their partner, that kind of weighs on them. They'll take that shit to work. They'll be in a fuck of a mood all day. And it's the same with AFL, but the only difference is they're, you know, world-class athletes that are playing this sport, and obviously they're not going to be able to perform at their best if they have something hanging over their head like this. I don't know the ins and outs of what's going on. I do think that if this is the case, and what has been reported with, you know, things that have gone down with relationship breakups and everything else, I think is definitely impacting, because this is a team that should be coming out firing. They've just lost a grand final. It should be motivating them to come back bigger and stronger the following year, to you know, be on their redemption arc. But the Brisbane we have seen so far is a shadow of the Brisbane that we saw in the grand final last year, and they can't really blame that on retirees, because Daniel Rich didn't really play much of a role last year, and I know they've lost Kitty Coleman to injury, but he's not the type of player that can carry Brisbane on his back. He is a great player, don't get me wrong, but him being absent doesn't make Brisbane a 0-3 starting team. I don't know what's going on at Brisbane. I think this is a saga that's obviously going to continue, because we know the media love to get a hold of a story and run with it. But the story that I'm running with is Brisbane are 0-3. Collingwood finally get a win on the board and showed us that they are still capable of playing their best brand. And if that can click for Collingwood moving forward, could be very dangerous for other teams that they're coming up against, especially in the interim. Before we move on as well, there was another comment posed to myself in regards to the fact that Pendlebury was cited by the MRO for the open-handed whack that he dished out to Lachie Neale in the guts during the game, and some people were calling for a suspension. Some people were saying it deserved a fine. Scott Pendlebury is one of those players that has gone through his career with a clean record, so he was never going to get suspended for something like this. And he, I think, hit the nail on the head when he spoke about it to the media after the game. He turned around and said that it's always the retaliator that gets caught, and it was obvious that players like Dane Zorko and even Lachie Neale were getting very, very body conscious around packs and getting a lot of bumps in and a lot of niggles, a lot of pushing. There was a lot of one-on-one tension between certain players, and Lachie Neale was one of those players that was getting a little bit of aggression out, and Pendlebury obviously had enough of it and decided to give a little bit of a whack back, and he got caught for it. And I don't think there's nothing more in it. There's nothing really to discuss there. Pendlebury, in my opinion, I've said for a very long time, he'll retire as one of the best players to never win a Brownlow medal. It still shocks me to believe that he never won one with the caliber of the player he has been. But there's nothing to discuss there, I don't think. And given the fact that we've seen worse happen that, you know, have warranted suspension or fines or anything like that, and they've gone untouched, an open-handed slap to the tummy, it's not going to do anything, okay? We can move on from that. Good Friday football. Carlton, North Melbourne, Marvel Stadium. This is where I grab the umpiring fraternity as a group and happily throw them underneath a bus and repetitively drive over the top of them, because the umpiring of this game was the downslide of the entire round and it was fucking terrible. It was so bad. I mean, it was bad enough watching on Thursday night 50 free kicks paid in the Brisbane-Collingwood game, 20 to Brisbane, 30 to Collingwood. In this game, we had 21 free kicks paid to North Melbourne, 34 free kicks paid to Carlton, 105 free kicks paid over the span of 2 games, 24 hours apart, 105 free kicks. What in the fuck is going on? The umpires are so whistle heavy in some games and then decide to shelve the whistle in other games. The inconsistency is starting to become a glaring problem, and it's frustrating a lot of supporters. So much so that one of the comments that I've been sent is directed at this game in particular. Carlton clearly too powerful for North, but seriously, how many goals these days from soft free kicks and 50-metre penalties? How much is too much? Fabric of footy being torn to shreds by 4 umpires destroying our game. It's fast degrading into a whistle fest no fan wants to see. And I wholeheartedly agree, because there were 8 or 9 goals kicked by Carlton that came directly from a free kick or a 50-metre penalty. And while there were some 50-metre penalties that were there, like the incident with Larkey slinging Mitch McGovern to the ground, I thought that was a warranted 50-metre penalty, regardless of whether Mitch McGovern was trying to be a hero and started that contact. You can't sling somebody to a ground. I was actually quite surprised that the MRO didn't look at that instance, because in isolation, it did look like Mitch McGovern might have hit his head on the ground from that sling, and we know that they want to protect the head because we've had suspensions go down this particular round for head-high contact. But the fact that Carlton ended up winning by the margin they did, aided by 8 or 9 goals directly from free kicks, is such a momentum killer. How is a young, redeveloping team supposed to find motivation to stay in a game when the opposition is being put into positions to kick gifted goals? Carlton fans are going to come at me for that. I could not care any fucking less if they did, because if they go into, discussions about that game of football and don't want to openly discuss the fact that they were gift wrapped and silver platted, 8 or 9 goals, they're delusional. And they're not the only team that has benefited from that. But when we look at the free kick differential, and there I believe plus 24 already on top of the free kick ladder, questions start to be asked, because there is a glaring difference already between the plus 24 Carlton has and the team that is on the bottom of the differential ladder on minus 17, which, surprise, surprise, is fucking Richmond again. And I know Richmond's undisciplined and give away stupid frees, but look at the difference between a negative 17 and a plus 24. That's just, it's fucking ridiculous. It really is. And the umpiring didn't get any better over the weekend. It actually, in some cases, was some of the worst umpiring that I have seen in a very long time. And it's upsetting, as I said, not just in this case for North Melbourne fans, but for AFL fans in general. Umpires are making a mockery and a farce out of our game. And I would love to know your thoughts in the comments down below on how you feel about the state of the umpiring right now. I would really love to get some discussion going and to see what you guys have to say. But obviously Carlton walked away with a huge win here, as would have been expected. North Melbourne put up a fight in parts, but unfortunately at the end of the day, Carlton were too strong. 9 goals combined between Charlie Curnow and Harry Mackay. Harry Mackay, in my opinion, maybe even in career best form right now. I haven't seen him firing like this in a very long time, especially since Charlie Curnow has come back into the mix. We know he's won a Coleman on his own, but I think he's struggled to find his feet since Curnow's come back into the team, and now they're kind of starting to learn to coexist, and they're a very deadly duo. Fremantle Adelaide at Optus Stadium was not one of the worst umpiring displays I've seen, but just one of the worst football displays that I've seen. It's a shame to think that I was more disinterested in this game than watching the Bulldogs absolutely smack West Coast. It was bad. It was bad. The skills on display in this game were subpar, apart from a few players from Fremantle that really were clean and racked up a lot of the ball. There were some Adelaide players that stood tall as well, but Adelaide's forward half, I don't know what the fuck is going on. It makes me question whether or not going into this season, Adelaide has been overhyped and is maybe overrated as a club. This is a team that I thought could have pushed top 5, top 4 this year, and they're playing a bottom 4 brand. And I really start to question now whether this team will play finals this year. I know we're only heading into round 4 this coming weekend. It is still very early days. We've still got 20 odd rounds of football to go. But this team has gone so hard at making sure they're targeting the right players when it comes to the draft. They've targeted their key trade-ins from other clubs. They brought in Jordan Dawson from Sydney. They brought in Isaac Rankin from the Gold Coast, who they want to have as a marquee player. They've got Tex Walker, who kicked 70-plus goals. And this year, Tex looks like a player that has played beyond his years and shouldn't be playing anymore. And that turnaround in just a handful of months is so bizarre, because last year he put a lot of naysayers to rest and showed that even at his age, he is still at the peak of his powers. He can still play good football. We haven't seen that Tex yet. Darcy Fogarty, no impact in the forward half. And this is a player that I have always thought would eventually become a breakout forward and one of the best forwards of the comp. Hasn't done that yet. Rankin, again, quiet. It's just the main trio, really, of Crouch, Laird, and Dawson. And even then, Dawson's disposal efficiency has been absolutely horrendous. Riley O'Brien in the ruck has been great for them, but can't get much out of the midfield group if they're not performing. And then it obviously puts their back six under the pump because of, just the inability to win contests and having to rely on certain players. And the fact that they were so inaccurate in front of goal is just a continuation of kind of what we saw last year in some of the games they lost. They lost games last year, at least a handful of them, that would have seen them play finals had they have been more accurate. And again, we see that kind of haunting them heading into this year. Fremantle on the flip side, they're 3-0. And it's the first time they've been 3-0 for a very long time. I actually don't think they've ever gone 3-0. I'd have to check the stats for that. But some of the statistics have them positioned as one of the best teams in the comp for not conceding, over X amount of points. Caleb Sarong is outperforming individually and would really be giving the Brownlow a hot shake after 4 rounds of football, even though Fremantle have only played 3 of the 4. And collectively, they look like they've got everything working. And, they've shifted some magnets around this year. They've got Hayden Young now playing a midfield role. But everybody's doing their part. And Fremantle, instead of Adelaide, are now looking at the team that could be in the finals mix when not many people gave them a chance. But still, just watching this game, as good as it is to see Fremantle up and firing, fuck, it was terrible to watch. It was just, I'm all for a scrappy game, but holy fuck. Essendon, St Kilda, a game of 2, I think, over the weekend that came down to the wire. Less than a goal in it, and it was a game. Essendon versus St Kilda was a game that literally came down to the dying moments, in a game where St Kilda led for the majority, and Jake Stringer, the player that we have come to know as a rather clutch player, rather cometh the moment, cometh the man kind of persona about him, marks the ball 50 metres out, on an angle, goes back no problem, banks it through the middle, thank you mother for the rabbits, Essendon run away with the win. Some would argue Essendon deserved to win that game. I feel St Kilda probably deserved to win. I thought they played a more consistent brand through the day, but the fight back from Essendon was great to see. And I don't know whether it's this Essendon edge that they're running with. I still think it's a stupid concept, because you're going to have to go all in as players with that. And now that they have come out publicly to say that this Essendon edge and they want to come out harder and tougher at the ball, if they now don't do that and they fail to deliver that, they're then in the spotlight and they're made a mockery of. So it's going to be interesting to see how this whole Essendon edge kind of thing progresses through the year, because they're eventually going to come up against a team that's going to return fire even harder. And I'm going to love to see contests like that. St Kilda are a team that, since Ross Lyon has come back, has prided themselves on defensive structure and their defensive abilities. And the pressure was too much for that defensive setup, and it just cracked. And I don't know whether it was a inability to score because Max King was missing. I thought Tim Membry could have had an ability to get off the chain in this game, and he had very little input. I actually don't think Membry kicked a goal at all, which was quite surprising. The usual suspects in Higgins, and the smaller kind of forwards stood tall. Caminiti came in, and I think he kicked 1 or 2 goals. So I think definitely they missed Max King a lot this week. But it was the same suspects for both teams really standing tall. You know, your Jack Steeles and your Jack Sinclairs and your Wanganeen Maliras for St Kilda. For Essendon, it was your McGraths, your Parrish, your Zach Merritt, and Nick Martin, 44 disposals coming out of half-back, which has tied Darcy Parish for the most amount of disposals in a game by an Essendon player. I have some thoughts about that because some people have been saying that that warrants a best on ground performance. I honestly don't think it does, and that will be reflected in my MVP votes later in this video. I just think some stats are bolstered by the fact that taking a kick in and stepping over the full back line constitutes a disposal, and 6 or 7 of those 44 were from him taking a kick in. So you compare that to somebody like a Parrish or Tom Mitchell, who I believe holds the all-time disposal record at 53, where they're inside mids that were getting, you know, a lot of the ball on their own. Like, you could argue, okay, Tom Mitchell is one of those players that hung back out and he likes getting the 1-2 handball, so he racked it up like that. But I think midfielders getting the ball is more hard won in a contest than being able to get kick-ins. That's why I'm a little bit bullish on players like Harry Sheasel and Nick Dacos, who take kick-ins as well, which always boosts their stats. But it doesn't make him less of a player, because skill-wise, Nick Martin was on point. It was just a tale of two teams. It was one that was wanting to put up a fight and really take it to the opposition, and St Kilda, just at one point, I thought that they were going to run away with the game, and then it just all crumbled. It just fell apart for them. There was a suspension out of this game. Marcus Windhager copped a 1-week ban for a bump that knocked out, I think it was Durham from Essendon. It was a motion of a connecting from the hip to head, and they chose not to fight that particular suspension, so he will miss the upcoming gather-round game against Richmond, which I think for Richmond is rather handy, given that Windhager is a great lockdown type of player, and having that kind of out of the situation, we can kind of secure the fact that maybe some of Richmond's midfielders can be a little bit more free than they would be. But they're going to operate a lot better with Max King in that side, and I think it kind of exposed a glaring weakness for St Kilda. Without Max King down forward, they lacked that big, tall, physical presence, and I don't think they have it anywhere else outside of maybe Hayes coming back into the lineup, but I don't think Hayes has had enough opportunity at the level to kind of establish himself in that fact. So it'll be interesting to see, because both teams have a lot of talent, you know, individually, but we saw the tail of the tape was two different sides completely. One that was wanting to take the fight right until the final siren, and one that let the ball fumble out of their hands, as unfortunate as it sounds. Port Adelaide and Melbourne went down at Adelaide Oval in a game where I feel Port Adelaide fumbled the unfumbleable. They should have won this game quite convincingly, in my opinion, and Melbourne, just again, in a game where Port Adelaide looked like they were home and hosed, Melbourne came back and just kept on firing, and, you know, all of those shots landed, as unfortunate as it is for the Port Adelaide fans. But again, umpiring and the lack of kind of crept back in again. And yet again, another week of football where we see the boundary umpires? Holy shit. Another week again where the boundary umpires fumble the one and only job they have. Well, they've got two jobs, really. Determine whether the ball is out of bounds on the full or if it's a throw-in, and then throw the fucking ball into the ground if it is a throw-in. And Finlayson kicks the ball to Willie Rioli, who marks the ball a metre over the fucking boundary line, and it's paid a mark. Now, the problem I have with this is, unlike some certain situations we have seen this year where the Jack Higgins goal, for example, from the angle they showed, you couldn't really definitively see if he was fully over the line. You could argue there was margins there. Rioli didn't actually take clean possession of the ball when he marked it until he was almost in the second row of the crowd. So if it's not a mark and he didn't control it, it's a throw-in. They pay it a mark, and I'm pretty sure they scored off of it in the end. And it's just, at least they're consistent in not making a fucking decision, I suppose. But again, it's a momentum killer. And there were other moments in this game that I feel there were free kicks that should have been paid that were let go. There was a period of time in the forward line where I saw a couple of Melbourne players in defence, or even in their forward half, tackled with the ball, dropping the ball, throwing the ball. Umpires weren't paying it. There was a chain where I saw 2 or 3 throws or dropping the balls that were just play on, play on, play on. And I think to myself, these bastards paid 105 free kicks in the opening 2 games and were so quick to pull the whistle out. And then in games that like coming down to the wire, there's like a kick or so in it, and they're putting the whistle away. It really frustrates the fuck out of me. It really does. And I don't know where the buck is going to stop. I don't know where the changes are going to come from, because the umpiring fraternity and the AFL, you know, as separate entities and even together, very rarely come out and admit fault. They have this week, and we'll get to that when that particular game comes around to discuss. But something needs to be done here, because it was getting way out of hand. But all credit to Melbourne. The game that probably a lot of people would have written them off on came and played a decent game of football. And it was quite surprising, really, because statistically, when you look at the wins and losses that they have had over the last 12 months, they really don't perform well in wetter, dewy conditions. And I felt that game kind of had some of those aspects in the mix. So it's a game where they should have lost going off of those statistics, but they were able to find a way. They dug in deep, and it was some players that don't really get much recognition that stood tall. Like Alex Neil-Bullen played a sensational game of football, and personally, I think all of us as AFL supporters have kind of players from the opposition that you don't really like all that much, and Alex Neil-Bullen is that for me with Melbourne. But credit where it's due, you know, he played a great game. You know, Christian Petrarca still went about his way. Max Gawn played a sensational game for Melbourne. A standout for Port for me was Willem Drew. You know, they talk about Rosie, Butters, Dersma when Dersma was there, but Willem Drew doesn't get near as enough recognition as he should get. Same with Miles Bergman. So many young, talented kids in that Port Adelaide team that go uncredited and undiscussed, at least with myself and the conversations I hear and have about football. Great game of football to watch, but Port Adelaide should have taken this one home comfortably, and unfortunately they had a little bit of egg on their face after this game was wrapped up. Western Bulldogs hosted West Coast, and we can probably end that one there. And in all seriousness, I think we all knew this was on the cards, even though West Coast came down to Marvel Stadium last year and defeated the Bulldogs in a huge upset. This was a completely different game, and it was a game again where Beveridge made some very questionable decisions, and I don't know whether that was out of arrogance and a kind of we're only playing West Coast so I can do these things kind of mindset, but you know, substituting Liberatore out of the game when he was a pivotal player throughout. Marcus Bontempelli primarily played out of the forward 50 all game when he almost won a Brownlow last year playing in the midfield. I don't understand the shift. He is one of your best midfielders, if not your best midfielder. Why are you playing him out of the forward 50 when you have Jamara Ugle-Hagan, you've got Aaron Norton, you've got English who can go down there when he's resting out of the ruck, you got Rory Lobb. I don't fucking understand what the fuck Beveridge is doing. But hey, at least this week he chose Jack McRae to get a game. That's fucking blown my mind. The big conversation point that has come out of this game, however, is the expert commentary and the media personnel that are now asking the question of whether or not West Coast are in a position to be handed either a priority pick or a priority pick package similar to what North Melbourne have recently been given. And we know the drop-off West Coast have gone under. For those of you that might be watching this that are international, and I know there are some that are, and you're unfamiliar with West Coast circumstances, this is a team that won a premiership in 2018. So only 6 years ago, they won the big dance against Collingwood. when COVID hit in 2020 and teams were forced into hubs and had to live away from home, West Coast and Fremantle were able to stay located where they were for a period of time, but West Coast were decimated by the COVID virus and injury, and they had to turn to their reserves team in the WAFL, the Western Australian Football League, which is basically, if you consider AFL as senior football, then the WAFL is reserves football. They had to take players out of the reserves to be able to field a team at the top level. That's how badly they were hurt, and that kind of hurt them for a couple of years. But the excuse now, like, where does the excuse stop? And I saw Adam Simpson, this week talking about their past and everything else, and I made a comment on social media about the fact that Adam Simpson needs to let go of the past and needs to accept that what's happening right now is detrimental to that club, and until they have the mindset of needing to move forward, they will not move forward. I'm good friends with a West Coast supporter who is so incredibly heartbroken with the lack of effort that they have put in. And it's bad to watch. It really is. Like, statistically, last year we were having conversations about the team that we have seen perform this bad last time was Fitzroy, when they were still in the competition, and Fitzroy performed so poorly, they were removed from the competition. That is how bad West Coast have been playing. There's now question marks as to whether West Coast will win a game of football this year. They won 2 or 3 last year, so it would be a step backwards if they didn't win a game. I just don't know where the improvement's going to come from, because they've obviously lost some players with retirement, and they're going to have more players that are reaching that end of their career that are going to retire. What's going to happen when those players are gone? When Jack Darling is gone out of that forward line, they're going to be left with just Oscar Allen and then some young talent that they're going to need to train up, like a Ryan Marrick. When they lose players like McGovern out of that back line, who's going to be that strong intercept defender? They don't have a backup. It's kind of like they've pigeonholed themselves, because even though they have drafted well and they've brought in some solid young talent and they've had to expose those young kids to the game earlier, you'd think that would have West Coast in a better kind of place, because these young kids have had experience quicker than most would. Some people questioning whether the Harley Reid acquisition with that number 1 pick, were West Coast better off trading that number 1 pick to get 2 or 3 top 10 picks instead and get 2 or 3 kids in, as opposed to just getting the 1 to help them flourish the rebuild a little bit more? I don't know. I'd love to know what you guys have to say on that, especially if you follow West Coast and where you stand as a West Coast supporter, because I definitely feel the priority pick shouldn't be discussed, because they have won a premiership only 6 years ago, whereas North Melbourne we haven't seen at that level for so long. But I'm still against giving priority picks to teams that are underperforming. I feel it undercuts certain systems, and then you could have integrity issues with clubs underperforming on purpose to get those picks, tanking. We know Melbourne historically has done that in the past. I don't know where the buck stops, but West Coast were subpar at best, and the Bulldogs come off of a second week in a row where they win quite convincingly. Richmond versus Sydney at the MCG. I said it in my tipping video. If Richmond came out and won this game and fucked my tip, because I tipped Sydney, I would be ecstatic. And we fucking got the job done. My heart was in my fucking throat. I could feel my testicles right about here as well. When there was 2 minutes on the clock and we were 12 points up, I turned around to my sister and said that it's not game over yet. I've seen Richmond lose from this point of the match before. And then Errol Goulden kicks a goal from the top of the goal square, and I thought, oh fuck, here we go. As soon as we rushed that behind and then maintained possession for that 55 seconds, I was so stoked. And this was a game that I was happy about for a number of reasons. Obviously, Uze's first win as our head coach. He managed to pick it up in only his 4th game, whereas Damien Hardwick, it took him 10 games to get his win, so he's already got a leg up there. And just seeing post-game how the club got around all the young kids and embraced YZE and made sure YZE was in the middle, and they gave him the Gatorade shower, and it was one of the loudest renditions of our club song that I have heard sung since the 2020 grand final win. There's a real belief there, and I feel everybody in that room is invested with the rebuild we are currently going under. And as a Richmond supporter, that gets me really excited, because there are some really good young kids that are in that mix that have been performing really well. Ryan Mansell, one of the best games I've seen him play for the club. Seth Campbell has been a revelation coming into the team this year. Maurice Rioli, best game of football I've seen him play for the club. Tom Brown in defence was absolutely sensational. Tyler Sonsie comes back in and he had some great moments. Thompson Dow had some great moments. It's just so good to see these kids getting opportunity and running with it. And we finally got to see YZE's game plan like executed well. Richmond going from a team that was built upon a manic Richmond style that Hardwick helped create to now maintaining possession, slowing the tempo, controlling the game, moving the ball by foot. And it really caught Sydney off guard. And commentators were saying Richmond are executing Sydney's game plan better than Sydney. And that's where I feel the breakdown came from. And I've had comments asking me this week, what happened with Sydney? Were there imposters that were playing in their part? And I think I don't know whether it was overconfidence coming into the game, because obviously Sydney should have very well smacked Richmond, because Richmond have been hit with injury so bad this year, and then they went into this game without Grimes and without Dustin Martin, and a lot of people have the mindset of no Dusty, no Richmond. So even I thought we were going to get touched up quite a bit. But Richmond really stood up to the occasion, and the pressure that we put on was some of the best pressure I've seen Richmond put on in a few years. And everybody played a part. Everybody did a role. Maikelti Lafau kicked his first 2 goals in AFL and played a role. Marlon Pickett, I've been very bullish on, but he played a really good game of football this weekend. Nick Vlosten, best on ground for me. I don't know how this guy has not been given an All-Australian jacket before. He should be one of the first people picked for the All-Australian this year based off how he's been playing. He's an intercept beast. He is one of the best intercepting defenders in the game right now, and you cannot convince me otherwise. And I would still have that opinion if I wasn't a Richmond supporter. It is not hard to look past how great of a footballer this guy is. This win, however, was soured. Liam Baker copped a week for front-on contact, which made accidental hand contact. They tried to fight it at the tribunal to get it overturned, but even though the tribunal acknowledged that Liam Baker was trying to spoil the ball, he still made contact with the head, and because they're trying to rub that out, he will miss this upcoming round against St Kilda, which is upsetting because Baker's been one of our best performers this year. Then we have Tom Lynch go down during the game, and I thought it was only going to be maybe a knee or an ankle, so maybe it's only going to be a couple of weeks, but no, he requires hamstring surgery. He's going to be out for 10 to 12 weeks. And then Noah Bolter, with 15 seconds to go on the clock, accidentally makes knee-on-knee contact with Grundy, hurts his MCL, and he's going to be out for 3 to 5. Tom Lynch and Noah Bolter, 2 of our most important key role players in the team, whether it's Bolter as a key forward or as a key defender. Bolter's one of our best, and Tom Lynch, obviously, we missed for 12 months already. He comes back in, and he's already out again for another 10 to 12. He can't take a trick. That's compacted by the injury list we already have. Prestia, Graham, Dusty, Grimes, Hopper, Trezise, Gibcus, the list goes on. Fawcett, even some younger kids that, I wanted Jacob Bauer to maybe come in this week against St Kilda. He's just done his hamstring at training. He's out for 4 to 5 weeks. We can't take a trick. But with opportunity, with these players going down, opportunity now goes to some young kids. And kids like Kane McAuliffe might be able to debut this week in front of a home crowd in Adelaide because he's an Adelaide boy. Some other players that are on the fringe like a Sam Naismith or a Samson Ryan now get opportunity. Jacob Kajiski. So it's going to be very interesting to see how YZE rolls the dice and his thought process, because I think Martin, Grimes, and Graham are all available for selection as well. So does he bring in all of those senior players? Does he look to younger players? This is where teams are truly tested. I love when Richmond's back are against the wall because I feel Richmond come out throwing punches harder when that happens. But as long as they put up a performance like they did against Sydney, I give them every opportunity to win this weekend, even with some key players out. It was impressive to watch. And I don't think that's anything against Sydney, because I still think Sydney have been the benchmark of the competition this year. It's just going to be a blip on the radar for them. Every team has a blip every now and again on a premiership run, and I still feel Sydney are very much in that top 4 premiership mix. If you support Sydney, you've got nothing to worry about at all whatsoever. But fucking go Tigers, so fucking happy. Umpiring was wayward again. We can't not talk about this game without talking about the umpiring, because there were some decisions that really triggered me in this game, and probably more so because I am a Richmond supporter. But at the end of round 0, I made a comment about Nathan Broad being pinned for deliberate rush behind and giving away a free kick in front of goal to Gold Coast, and said that I'm okay with that being paid as long as they consistently did it. I don't understand how Jake Lloyd is able to handball the ball from 15-20 metres away over the behind line to a teammate who is on the other side, and the umpire doesn't see that as deliberate. If a player has positioned himself deliberately behind the line to receive a handball, and a player without much pressure being put on him turns around and handballs at 15-20 backwards, that's a fucking deliberate. To me, that should be paid. And there were a lot of non-paid holding the balls in this game. There was a couple of chains again where Nick Blakey, Chad Warner, caught holding the ball or throwing the ball, weren't paid. The Nick Vlosten free kick that was paid at the end of the game, very, very touchy, very controversial. From the angle they showed, you couldn't really see if there was or wasn't any high contact there, but obviously with his head being down, Papley running over the top, umpire's going to pay it. There was a missed front-on contact free kick against Seth Campbell late in the game as well. Again, it's just the lack of consistency, and if they're going to call certain free kicks in some games, they have to follow through. They need to make a consistent effort, and this was some of the worst not calling of holding the ball that I've seen in a long time. There was just blatant throws, drops, prior opportunity was given, and it was for both teams as well. There were Richmond players that were caught in the same process, and Sydney weren't paid free kicks as well. As I said, it was a downhill slope that led us to Hawthorn taking on Geelong in one of the worst displays of umpiring that I have seen in a very long time. Before we discuss that game, though, I have to turn attention to a comment that was sent to myself about the Richmond game, and it says, "The Richmond injury curse rolls on for a 3rd consecutive year. Is there genuinely an issue with fitness at Tigerland?" And this was a discussion point that I've had with some other people, because it seems to always be soft tissue injuries with us. Trent Cotchin, historically, hamstring. Prestia, hamstring. We've seen Dusty go down with a hamstring. Lynch has gone down with a hamstring. We've seen Gibkiss out with that hamstring. So I think maybe our conditioning needs to be looked at. I don't think fitness is an issue. But I definitely feel this year, just in general, I have seen a lot more injuries happening to players than not. I mean, North Melbourne currently have some Achilles curse. They've had 2 players in back-to-back weeks rupture their Achilles, and they've even had a staff member in Todd Viney rupture his Achilles as well. It's sad to see that all these injuries are happening. I don't know whether we can attribute that to the grounds being used as concert venues in the off-season, with the whole Taylor Swift concert that went down and everything else, and Pink, and, I don't know whether we can say that the ground has been affected by those things. There will be people that say that, but I just hope this can turn around, because I hate seeing players get injured, especially if they play for Richmond. It just breaks my heart. My heart is still broken for Gibkiss. I'm so terribly upset about Tom Lynch and Bolter this week that it's not even funny. But we now need to turn our attention to Hawthorn versus Geelong, which, again, as I said, one of the worst displays of umpiring I've seen in a long time, and it poses some questions that were posed to myself. Jack Ginnivan not getting any frees paid when clearly getting wrapped around the neck still is an interesting subject, is one of the comments that I got given, as well as a conversation point that was brought to my attention through another friend of mine that basically brought up players in the past who historically made a career, or at least a part of their career, synonymous with playing for free kicks. Lindsay Thomas was one that was brought up to myself, obviously historic for ducking the head and drawing head-high free kicks. Toby Green is another one of those that has also had rules like the Toby Green rule, where he goes studs up in contests. He actually did that in the last game he appeared in, because obviously this week Gold Coast and GWS didn't play, but the week prior he went studs up in a contest again. And we know that he has a history of ducking the head and being a bit of a grub when he wants to be. Thankfully, he hasn't done that for a few years, and I think that's really helped him turn his career around and make him a marquee player of the comp. But I'm in two mindsets about Jack Ginnivan, because I think it's a very strong case of the boy who cried wolf. Obviously, he has made a run of playing for head-high free kicks to the point where umpires now aren't sure whether or not to pay the head-high free kick, because they're not sure whether he's playing for it or not. Now, admittedly, there were probably 2 or 3 free kicks on the weekend that he didn't duck, and he had an arm come over the top and get him over the shoulder, and those free kicks should be paid. But he's still in the process of always leading with the head, rolling the shoulder, trying to draw that head-high free. And as long as he does it, it's not going to get paid, because the umpires have now been told to actively look out for that. And he's only got himself to blame for that, because he's pigeonholed himself into that position. But the umpiring decisions that were howlers do not stop there, because we had interesting moments where, like, Brian Myers turns into Lionel Messi and slides in for the ball feet first, tripping a Hawthorn player. No, not taking out the legs, that's play on, no, don't worry about it. A Geelong player under pressure kicks the ball off the ground, straight out of bounds. Nah, throw that in, thanks. Later in the game, it accidentally comes off the boot of James Sicily, who's running into a pack. Like, the ball's bouncing, he runs in, it ricochets off the boot, deliberate out of bounds, free kick Geelong. I definitely feel when it comes to teams that have a better run with umpiring decisions, Geelong is in that top echelon of teams that is always comfortably looked after. I'm one of those conspiracy nuts that believe that Stephen Hawking has actively made rules to benefit Geelong and dampen others. You've only got to look at the fact that the standing on the mark rule and not being able to move was kind of brought in and executed after Richmond defeated Geelong in the grand final. And, had those comeback wins against Geelong to get to grand finals. And just some other really stupid things that shouldn't have been implemented seem to have benefited Geelong more than any other team. And just looking at this game, it was almost, and I don't want to say this because I don't want to put ideas in people's heads that, some teams are looked after more than others, but it was almost like watching a game where the umpires have been given the directive to make sure Geelong get given everything and Hawthorn get given nothing. And I've seen memes all weekend involving WWE superstars where, people are getting clotheslined and it's like, Geelong's defense against Jack Ginnivan, and he's just getting clotheslined around the ring. Those are all funny, but the state of the umpiring isn't. It's a joke, but it's not one to be laughed at. It is fucking terrible. I'm lost for words. This game, as I said, I just continued to watch it and I was just left dumbfounded. I really don't know what the fuck was going on. I really do not. And it was a game that I thought Hawthorn in parts actually looked rather good. They put up a fight. They came hard at 3/4 time. The game was halted due to lightning interfering, and it's only happened once before, I believe. So there was a delay in coming back to the ground, and after that delay, Geelong just came out refreshed and ran away with the game, which was unfortunate because up until three-quarter time, Hawthorn managed a way to fight their way back in, and they looked good in parts. It just blows my mind that after a weekend of seeing a decline of the umpiring, that we end on Easter Monday, which historically has been a great clash between these two clubs, be so heavily one-sided with non-decisions, and even the decisions that are paid. But Geelong get the win, and they're sitting pretty at the moment. Hawthorn, I don't think, if you're a Hawthorn supporter, you shouldn't be leaving this game disgruntled with the effort. I just think it's just, again, failure to convert. I mean, Nick Watson, the Wizard, did a very good magic trick from 5 metres out in front of goal, put the ball, when the goals are here, he kicked it that way and it went out of bounds on the full. That was a good little magic trick from the Wizard. Mabior Chol, again, some very questionable moves from him. Only 2 weeks ago, he went knees up in a contest that broke Stephen May's ribs, or fractured some ribs. He didn't have a case to answer for there because it was in a marking contest. And again, he leapt up in a marking contest again and kneed Tom Stewart in the back of the head, and he didn't take the mark. And my question now is, if we're looking at head-high contact with the hip and shoulder, should we be looking at head-high contact with stray knees in marking contests, especially if ones that are deemed unrealistic or a player does not take possession of the ball? Because Mabior Chol in back-to-back weeks has injured a player, potentially, and gotten away with it. And then you've got players like Baker who makes incidental contact with trying to spoil the ball and cops a week. Again, inconsistency from the AFL. And inconsistencies, again, that will not be addressed, unlike, and I'm shocked that this happened, the umpiring fraternity in the AFL came out this week and actually turned around and said that there were some decisions on Monday's game between Hawthorn and Geelong where Ginnivan should have been paid a free kick and wasn't. They actually admitted fault. Very rarely it happens. I'd go buy a lottery ticket if I were you, because the chances of winning the lottery are exactly the same as the AFL ever admitting, defeat or fault. Ever. I'm just really upset with the state of the umpiring this year from all counts. Not just Richmond games. I'm not one of those people that are like, oh, Richmond's getting screwed by the umpires. No, the umpiring has been atrocious every game, every week, and something needs to happen. I don't know what will. But that now leads us into the final portion of the podcast, which is the Hip and Shoulder MVP award. You know, that invisible award that the players of the competition are never going to know about, never going to see, never going to give a fuck about, but I'm doing it anyway. 3-2-1 system, just like the Brownlow. But before I mention my 3-2-1, I always like to throw a couple of names in the mix that may have just missed out on a vote or two, just to show my thought process behind the players that I'm thinking of. Obviously kicked off this weekend gone with Brisbane taking on Collingwood. The two players that I have stiff to miss for the one vote were John Noble and Jeremy Howe. Both played brilliant defensive games. I got in an argument during the week over John Noble, because I'm still a strong believer that John Noble should have been a part of that premiership team last year. And someone from Collingwood, a Collingwood supporter, was trying to tell me that Markov is a better defender than John Noble. And I'm not going to get into that discussion because it's fucking idiotic. But John Noble comes back into the team and shows why he should have been in that premiership team, because he was really good. Similar with Jeremy Howe. He was great in ensuring players like Danaher and Hipwood had very little impact on the game. My one vote is going to go to Nick Dacos from Collingwood. At halftime, the commentators were saying that if Collingwood were to win this game, they needed lift out of the Dacos boys, who at that point in time had very little input. And Nick Dacos in that second half turned it up. And I could not give him, I couldn't have him in a situation where he didn't get at least one vote. I thought he played a really good game. The 2 votes for me goes to Jamie Elliott. Kicked a handful of goals, was pivotal around the ground. The way he moves and gets himself involved in scoring involvements and things of that nature really impressed me, especially in this game. And I thought he was one of Collingwood's best, if not Collingwood's best on the night. And my 3 votes, and it doesn't happen often, because a lot of people believed that The 3 votes should always go to the winning team. I'm not a strong believer of that. I think if a player outperformed on the opposition and they deserve it, they're going to get it. And my 3 votes goes to Lachie Neale, because I thought he had a huge game against Collingwood and almost single-handedly at one point was keeping Brisbane in the fight. To North Melbourne Carlton, my stiff to miss was Harry Sheezel from North Melbourne. I thought he had a really good game for North. Tom Powell was probably stiff to miss as well for North. I thought the two of them were pretty sensational on the day. As far as disposals go, they were 2 of the biggest disposal getters. They had a good impact for North, but I feel with the margin at the end of the game, as well as the 3 that I've picked here, I think the 3 that I've got had a substantial stance and input in this game that had them above the stiff to miss category. So my 1 vote goes to Charlie Curnow. He kicks, a handful of goals. He was hard to stop. He was looking good. When you come out and kick 4, I think he kicked 4 in the end. You're always going to get in the mix with votes. I got dragged a couple of weeks ago because I didn't have players that kicked a decent amount of goals in the mix, and I have learned. So Charlie Curnow gets the 1. Patrick Cripps gets the 2 for me. Was Carlton's probably best midfielder on the day. Hit the scoreboard, plenty of tackles, plenty of marks, plenty of disposals, handful of clearances. Was really good. And obviously kicking 5, Harry Mackay. And I said it before, he's looking, to me at least, being in career best form. He's really taken his goal kicking on board this year after a 12-month period where he was getting dragged, and he looks good. He looks really good. Fremantle Adelaide. My stiff to miss is Alex Pearce and Michael Walters from Fremantle. Pearce obviously keeping Tex and Fogarty goalless, and Michael Walters, probably up until halftime, was probably in the conversation to be best on ground, but he slowed down severely in the second half, which is why he misses. My 1 vote goes to Luke Ryan. Defensively sound, has been one of the better defenders of the comp this year. Get the ball into his hands, and he does magic with it all the time, and I love his interceptability for Fremantle. My 2 votes goes to Caleb Sarong. Hasn't put a foot wrong so far out of any games that he has played. He's looking strong. He's leading the competition in many stats. This year is probably going to be his breakout year. He had a big year last year, but I think he goes a step beyond that this season. And my 3 votes goes to Hayden Young. Transitioned into the midfield, had struggled the first couple of weeks, but really came into his own in this game, was incredibly hard to stop, looked very good with the ball, and was quite easily best on ground in general. He should even wrap up the 3 Brownlow votes, in my opinion. Essendon St Kilda, stiff to miss from Essendon, Jake Stringer and Andrew McGrath. Andrew McGrath was great, and Jake Stringer, obviously, with that clutch goal at the end, you could almost forgive anybody for saying give him the 1 vote because he got them over the line. However, my 1 vote, and it's going to trigger some people, but my 1 vote's going to Nick Martin. I don't think he was best on ground. As I said, you take away those 6 or 7 disposals that he got from bringing the ball in from full back, and he gets, okay, he still has 37, which is still quite impressive, but I don't think he was Essendon's best, which you'll see when it comes to the 3 votes, because the 2 votes I'm giving to Jack Steele. Monster amount of tackles, clearances, disposal. He was St Kilda's best. I think he'll even be in Brownlow contention when it comes to the votes for this game. And I gave Zach Merritt best on ground. I thought his work through the middle was more impressive in my eyes than the work of Nick Martin out of the back line. And I'm going to have people come at me for that. And you know what? I'm prepared for it. Come at me, baby. Let's discuss it. Bulldogs versus Gold Coast. I've got Latham Vandermeer from the Bulldogs missing out. Stiff to miss. And Elliot Yeo and Jeremy McGovern from West Coast. Both of them played really good games for their team. And even though they got absolutely smacked, I thought they played well enough to be in the 1 vote kind of conversation. The 1 vote, however, is going to Tim English. 2 goals, dominated the ruck. Around the ground, was absolutely everywhere. I rate him as a player. I would love him at Richmond, but the chatter at the moment is he could end up at West Coast next year. Let's see how that unfolds. But I very much thought he played a very good game. My 2 votes goes to Marcus Bontempelli. Played out the forward line, didn't have the monster amount of disposals as we're used to seeing him play, but he played a role, kicked 3 goals, and had a good outing. And I definitely think he was one of the best. But the best goes to Adam Treloar, best on ground by a mile. He was the best midfielder of the game. I believe that Marcus Bontempelli playing more forward time allowed Treloar to get more of the ball. He had over 30 I want to say he had over 35. I think he might have even had 36. So that might be overstating. I know for a fact he had over 30 touches. Laid a handful of tackles, had plenty of marks, plenty of clearances. Dominant performance from Treloar. Best on ground for me. Richmond versus Sydney. Stiff to miss. I have James Rowbottom from Sydney, who I think laid 13 tackles for the game. Fucking monster. Shea Bolton, Liam Baker, and Ryan Mansell all missed the 1 vote for me from Richmond. The 1 vote for me goes to Isaac Heaney. Huge game from Sydney. I think he's still probably front running currently for the Brownlow. Couldn't go past the performance he put in for Sydney. Kicked a couple of goals. Monster amount of disposals. Had some clearances. Laid tackles. Complete performance from him. My 2 votes goes to Timmy Taranto. Back to his best. 35 disposals. Laid tackles. Had clearances. Plenty of score involvements. One of the better games I've seen him play for a very long time. And I spoke about this man before. Nick Vlaston. His performance speaks for itself. 3 votes for me. Should have 3 votes for the Brownlow as well. And he got top marks from the Coaches Awards for that game too. And the final game of the round. Hawthorn Geelong. My stiff to miss. All come from Geelong. Max Holmes, Mitch Duncan, Tom Stewart, and Oliver Dempsey. All in the conversation for the 1 vote. But I gave the 1 vote to Brandon Parfitt. Huge game from him. Plenty of tackles. I think he had 10 or 11 tackles. Racked up plenty of the ball. This is a player that is a fringe player for Geelong. He's been on the in. He's been on the out. I really loved his game. I actually thought he was one of Geelong's best. 2 votes goes to Tanner Bruhn. Up until quarter time, I believe, he had 15 touches already. He was instrumental in this game, and I think it was the best game he has played for Geelong since coming over from GWS. And despite the loss, I am agreeing with the decision of giving the best on ground medal to this man, because I think he was best on ground, and I'm giving it to Hawthorn's James Worpel. He was everywhere. He did everything, and it's a damn shame that Hawthorn didn't get around him when needed to get over the line. And because I'm an absolute moron, I've just realised I completely skipped over the Port Adelaide-Melbourne game for the votes. So I'm going to have to do this off the top of my head instead of reading out what I've written down. I'm going to give the 1 vote to Alex Neil-Bullen. I thought he played a really good game. As I said, instrumental in their win. One of the best games I've seen him play for that club. The 2 vote I'm giving to Max Gawn. He was huge in this game and really getting back to his best after struggling against Grundy in round 0. And best on ground for me, which some might not agree with, but I'm giving it to Willem Drew. He had a complete performance. Very underrated as a player, and it was hard to look past him as best on ground. His numbers speak for themselves. Looking on the screen right now, all of these players have received at least 1 vote for the MVP award since round 0, but we still have a definitive top 5, some of which have moved positions due to getting some more votes, and some moving into the top 5 that weren't there moving into the round. In 5th place on 4 votes, we have Nick Dacos from Collingwood. Tied for 4th place on 5 votes, we have Zach Butters and Connor Rozee from Port Adelaide, and Marcus Bontempelli from the Western Bulldogs. Tied for 3rd place on 6 votes, we have Matt Rowell from the Gold Coast, and Jack Steele from St Kilda. Tied in 2nd place on 8 votes, we have Caleb Sarong from Fremantle, and Zach Merritt from Essendon. And tied for 1st place on 9 votes, we still have Tom Green from GWS, and we now have Isaac Heaney from Sydney. Before we wrap it up today, there is something that I failed to do at the end of all the podcasts up until this point in time, and that's turn attention to the AFL ladder. What's the point of doing a podcast if we don't discuss where all the teams are sitting after the round, right? So every podcast moving forward is going to always end with how the ladder is situated coming out of that particular round that we have discussed. Currently, our top 4 is GWS, Fremantle, Melbourne, and Geelong, with Sydney, Carlton, Western Bulldogs, and Port Adelaide rounding out the top 8. Of those 8 teams, GWS, Fremantle, Geelong, and Carlton are currently 3 from 3. They have not lost a game as it stands. The rest of the ladder is as follows. Essendon in 9th, Gold Coast in 10th, St Kilda in 11th, Collingwood in 12th, Richmond in 13th, Brisbane in 14th, and our bottom 4 is Adelaide, North Melbourne, Hawthorn, and the West Coast Eagles. It's going to be interesting heading into the next round because it's gather round. All games are going to be played in Adelaide and all teams are going to be playing. They have foregone the buys for this round, and I think the buys come back into the equation after gather round. But gather round was a great spectacle to watch last year. It's going to be very interesting to see how it plays out this year. Do hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, do me a favor, hit that like button down below. If you're new around here and you like the content I'm doing as well and you want to stick around and help build the community that I'm hopeful to build here, hit that subscribe button as well. It'd mean a lot to me if you did. But that's it from me, guys. I'm out of here, and as always, I will catch you guys next time.